Well, hello there, it is FrOzenSwipe, and I've got something a little bit different for you today. Now, this commentary is going to be about perspective and devil's advocate, and this is going to be hopefully one in a series of many commentaries that are going to be more informative than they are going to be me just ranting on about whatever. Hopefully I want to teach you guys about concepts that I feel that pretty much everyone should know, but for some reason these are things that you're not generally taught in school, or that you probably wouldn't come across. Usually these are things you'd probably have to go out of your way to learn, but I feel that these are things that everyone should know, and hopefully I'll do my best to try and explain these things. I by no means consider myself an expert in these things. I've done a course in behavioral psychology at CTYI, which, granted, while it doesn't make me an expert, it does give me a certain level of insight, and these topics are going to be on a variety of different concepts, whether they be psychological concepts, philosophical, even some things to do with theoretical physics. And one thing I really think I would want to look at is like the story of the Big Bang and how the universe came to be as it is now, which is a story that I don't think a lot of people really know about. But anyway, this is going to be the first of many of these commentaries, and I decided to pick these two concepts just because the first concept I feel is probably the best at opening your mind to, broadening your horizons and trying to look at the world differently than as you do now. And then obviously devil's advocate relates very heavily to perspective, so I feel that would obviously be a logical follow-on from that. But this first concept, perspective, is something that you should all have an idea of. I mean, otherwise you are a ridiculously narcissistic person, and I mean, that's like that is not a good thing. But the first thing I think you have to realize is that, and I know you've probably heard this a million times before, but the world does not revolve around you, and it's very easy to kind of get caught up in your own head and to basically only look at things from your own perspective, because that's the only perspective you really have. It's very easy just to kind of only see that which you can see and not try to imagine how other people would see the same thing, and trying to look at how different people would have different perspectives. It's very easy to get caught up in your own head and only think about things in one way. But it is very important to try and broaden your mind and understand that there are various different ways of looking at things, and that yours is not the only way out there. And that while there may be a consensus, there are obviously always people who will disagree with the consensus and have different thoughts or things like that. And I'm going to use the concept of people and try and understand other people and trying to understand their perspective as the basis of this concept. Generally speaking, when you think about it, people, there's a logical reason as to why people do everything and why they think the way they do, why they are the person they are. I mean, I'm sure a lot of people will argue that it may be down to nature, but I would be of the opinion, and most experts would be as well, that it is mostly nurture. It is the environment in which you're brought up which determines behavior. And while genetics do play a part, they do make behavior more likely to happen. They do not determine behavior. For example, a snake is more likely to, lie down on its belly and wriggle around in order to move forward than a human is. But that doesn't mean that the snake is necessarily going to do that unless the environment dictates that it should and it learns how to do it. But likewise, it doesn't necessarily mean that the human is not going to do that. It just makes, genetics do not determine behavior, they just make it more likely to happen. So what that means is that really we're all victims of circumstance. We're all really victims of our environment. And I could probably expand upon this more in a commentary about determinism, but we'll get back to what we're talking about now, which is perspective. And that we all live in slightly different environments. Like, an environment to one person may be even though it may be the same kind of area, you may even be in the same room, but their environment will always be different, because it's not just where they are at that particular moment. It's basically everywhere they go and everywhere they have been, and all of the different stimuli and things that have impacted upon their lives and how they have learned to adapt to these things creates who they are. I mean, while I'm sure most of you already understand the concept of, if you're trying to understand why someone does the things they do, or if you're trying to understand why people think the way they do, that you put yourselves in their shoes and crawl in their skin and try and put yourselves in their situation in order to understand them. sometimes what can happen is that you may still be in their situation. I mean, you can't know everyone's definite situation. You can't know every single experience they've ever had since birth, or since conception, actually, more like, because there are things that can influence you even before birth. But you can't understand absolutely everything that person has experienced, because, well, it's just impractical to learn all of those things, and you know, you're going to be very limited in your hypothetical construct of what you think their life is. But odds are, if you still cannot understand why someone does the things they do, or why they think, or why they are the way they are, then odds are you're probably missing a huge chunk of information. And instead of just giving in to your knee-jerk reaction, was to just kind of write them off, like to blame them for their strangeness or their weirdness, or saying that, you know, insulting them by saying they're weird or strange or stupid, or any number of other colourful insults I'm sure you'll be able to come up with. Instead of just doing that, learn to embrace your ignorance. Learn to embrace the fact that the reason why you can't understand this person is because you are missing a huge chunk of information. And odds are, if you were to learn this piece of information that you didn't already previously know, that this person will probably make a lot more sense to you, and why they behave the way they do will probably make a lot more sense once you know all the variables. But the key thing to take away from here is not to judge people until you have a good, well, I feel that you shouldn't judge people, but definitely try not to judge people when you are very limited on the information that you are given, because I feel that is not only unfair to the person, but it can also, you know, it doesn't make you necessarily a good person either. So I feel that it isn't right to lash out at someone else because of your ignorance. So the other thing that I want to talk about, the next concept that kind of leads from this, is the idea of devil's advocate. Now, this is actually going to be very good for those of you who tend to be very stubborn and tend to get very passionate about things. If you tend to hold an opinion and just you cannot see how anyone could disagree with you, you cannot see the other side of the argument, this is very good for, you know, getting past that, because that's not necessarily a good thing. If you can't understand where the other person is coming from, or if you can't understand both sides of the argument, well, then your argument's actually not going to be as strong as you think it is. You'll be better off knowing everything there is to know about it, and then once you have all the information, coming to a more informed decision, as opposed to just going with something and then just completely ignoring the opposition's arguments to it. Now, the whole concept of devil's advocate dates back to the Catholic Church. When they were canonizing a saint, generally speaking, you know, obviously the church would be rather favourable of this person, because, well, I mean, obviously that's how they get suggested for canonization. I mean, I've yet to see Galileo or Martin Luther be made a saint, because, well, the church weren't overly fond of those people. But even though they were perfectly good people, church didn't like them. If you know anything about those people, you'll probably know why. But anyway, yeah, the person who'd be up for canonization would be very well liked by the church, and obviously they recognize this. They recognize that they would be biased in favor of this person, and that this would prevent them from looking at this objectively. So what they would do is they get a member of clergy who either didn't know the person very well, or hadn't heard anything about them, you know, from a different parish or whatever, and they'd bring them to Rome, and they'd hold like a mock trial. And essentially what this clergyman would do, whether he be a priest or a bishop or whatever, he would basically compile all the arguments as to why this person should not be canonized, and he would essentially, his job was to argue on behalf of the devil as to why this person should not be canonized. And this is where the phrase devil's advocate comes from, and that's essentially what you're doing here. I mean, the person does not necessarily believe that this person should not be canonized, but he has to try and look at it from the mindset of the devil, and you know, trying to bring this person down as much as they can, even though he may not agree with it. So this is where that idea comes from. You need to be able to look at both sides of an argument to look at it objectively and make a more informed decision. I'm going to take, example, the topic of gun control. It's a very heated topic at the moment, and a lot of debate going on around that. But I would be fairly neutral on the topic, even though I actually know quite a bit about it, and I know the arguments on both sides. I would feel I'd be able to make a fairly informed argument for either side of that. And I would be able to make probably a better argument for either side of it than any singular person who would be very passionately on one side or the other, because I can see both sides of the argument. I can predict how the other person is going to, how the other side is going to argue, and as a result I can preemptively make rebuttal and rebuttal their points. But also I can see how they would react to my arguments, and I can tighten up my arguments so that they can't make rebuttal against it, or I can preemptively make counter rebuttal to their rebuttal. So as a result, my argument is much stronger than someone who is very passionately on one side and cannot see the other person's perspective could ever be. And as a result, if it were a debate, I'm clearly the person you'd rather have on my team, instead of someone who is very passionate about something and is just incapable of seeing how they could be wrong or how someone else could hold a different perspective to them. So okay, hopefully you've learned something today. Hopefully you can apply these two concepts to your everyday life. When you're looking at someone else, try and understand their perspective, and if you cannot understand it, then just accept the fact that you don't know enough about that person to make a judgment call on them. And also, if it comes to any form of debate or any form of argument, try and look at it from the other person or the other side's point of view, and try and figure out what arguments they're going to make, because not only will it'll make you much more informed on the topic that you're arguing about or debating about, but it will also make you a much stronger opponent, because you'll be able to predict how they are going to argue and how they're going to think. So leave a like if you want to see more of these videos, and of course if you disagree with me, feel free to leave it in the comments and I'll be more than happy to get back to you. And this has been FrOzenSwipe. Hope you have enjoyed, and thanks for watching.